The next thing we want to look at is the water cycle. The water cycle, that is the cycle of water where the sun heats the sea and causes evaporation, and from that evaporation we have clouds forming, and how the winds move those clouds, and from that rain falls. Now, the Quran accurately describes the water cycle and the origin of underground springs. And we're going to be talking about that after the break. So whatever you do, don't go away, because we have some more amazing facts for you in the proof that Islam is the truth. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to the proof that Islam is the truth. And we're going through some of the amazing scientific statements in the Quran, things that it was impossible for Prophet Muhammad to have known 1,400 years ago. Now, one of the things we want to talk about is the water cycle. Now, it may seem very obvious to us today about the water cycle, and for example, the origin of underground springs. But the ancient Greeks, for example, didn't seem to get it right, despite all of their philosophy and their knowledge and their ability. They actually theorized that underground springs were a product of spray that came off the sea and collected in caves. And then the spray that came off the sea and collected in the caves dripped down into the underground reservoirs through a great sea called the abyss. In fact, it was not until the 18th century that the water cycle was really accurately described. Yet the Quran says 1,400 years ago, in the 39th surah, in the 21st ayah, have you not seen that Allah sent water down from the sky and led it through sources into the ground? This is a simple but in fact highly accurate description of the water cycle. Another amazing fact that is mentioned in the Quran, we find in the 24th surah of the Quran in the 40th verse. And it's talking about the state of those people who disbelieve and reject faith in God. The Quran describes the state of the disbeliever, the person who has rejected faith, like a darkness. A darkness that is so dark, it is like the deep depths of darkness in a vast, deep ocean, overwhelmed with wave upon wave, topped by a cloud. If a man stretches out his hand, he can hardly see it. For any to whom Allah gives no light, there is no light. Now, on the surface, here Allah is giving a simple description. A person who does not believe in God and does not follow the guidance that Allah has sent down is a person who is in darkness. They are lost. Their life is a confusion. In fact, their life is so confusing, they can hardly see what is in front of them. This is how Allah is describing it. Darkness upon darkness, confusion upon confusion. He can hardly see or understand what is happening. If God does not give a person light, there is no light. So it is describing a type of absence of light, of being able to see or know really what is truly going on. And so this is the case that is described. So on the surface, we have a very poetic, we have a very strong and vigorous and amazing description of this darkness and this state of being lost. Yet when we examine it in more detail, there is something else going on here as well. There is a clue to some scientific truths. First of all, the Quran describes a vast, deep ocean, and it describes waves upon waves. Now, of course, most of us are familiar with the waves that are on top of the ocean. But what does it mean, waves upon waves? Are there other waves in the ocean? Well, we're going to find out. Also, the Quran talks about a person being deprived of light, that they can hardly see. Now, a ray of light is composed of 7 colors: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. And light, when it hits water, goes through what is called refraction. That means that, for example, in the upper 10 to 15 meters, the water absorbs the red color. And as you go deeper, each of the colors in the spectrum become absorbed by the water. Until you get to a depth of below about 1,000 meters, there is complete darkness. Now, what is amazing is that we also find in modern scientific discoveries that internal waves cover the deep waters of the seas and oceans, because the deep waters have a higher density than the waters above them. So waves upon waves. We have the internal waves in the deep, deep ocean, and then we have the waves on top of the ocean. And then the clouds and so on and so forth, they add to the darkness and the disparity and the breaking up and the refracting of light. Now, what is interesting is the deep darkness. Remember, the Quran says they stretch out their hand, they can hardly see it. This deep darkness begins below the internal waves in the ocean. In fact, there are certain fish down at those depths which need their own lights in order to be able to see. And amazingly, Allah has created these creatures that can actually generate their own lights. Now, this is really amazing because, of course, until very recently, no one has been able to penetrate and to reach those deep parts of the ocean. It is only with extremely sophisticated modern machinery and submarines and diving suits that someone has been able to go down to that depth. Yet we have the Quran 1,400 years ago describing the internal waves of the oceans and the darkness that is there at the depths of the oceans. How on earth, how in the heavens could a man living in the desert 1,400 years ago have known about such detailed information about a science like oceanography? Well, Professor Rao, who is an expert in marine biology at the King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah, says 1,400 years ago, a normal human being could not explain this phenomenon in so much detail. This information must have been coming from a supernatural source. My dear viewers, this even is not the end of the amazing scientific statements in the Quran, because the next